marshaling effective long-term relationships. And I think the first principle that I want to share in that regard is simply that recognizing that good relationships, successful relationships with funders, whether that be a foundation, an individual donor, a government agency, a corporation, that having the point of view that it is for the long term, that you need to look beyond what you do in getting a grant or a gift and what happens after you've said thank you, that there is an ongoing relationship that needs to be nurtured. Just making that kind of cognitive decision is perhaps the most important step in doing well with long-term funder relationships. Now, today I'm going to be taking a little bit different pathway than I did for the session that we did in November. I'm going to talk about some strategies that come from what I've done, what a lot of other folks have done, including some people on the line today in nonprofit management to look at principles. And I'm going to talk about four of them coming up. But I'm also going to talk about some of my personal experiences. I am a major donor to the Venda Museum of the Cold War in Culver City, California, and have given in different ways to other nonprofits. And I'm going to share a little bit of what has worked to get me as a donor engaged over the long haul and some things that haven't worked so well. So that's going to be one part of my initial few minutes. But then when we come to your questions, comments, and observations, think about what you've done either as a donor or as a nonprofit leader to help in the building of a long-term relationship. So those are the things that we're going to be talking about. It's even more important that we talk about them now because of the aftermath of the wildfires here in Los Angeles and the inevitable changes in priorities for funding that will come about from that, and also some of the changes that we were alluding to in the couple of minutes before noon, part of this session, that what's happening in terms of the federal administration and federal funding and its pass through to activities and changes in priorities that are happening at the state, regional, and local levels. So this was always an important topic, but it's going to be even a more important one coming up. Four strategies for building long-term relationships. And I call these the four Bs. Be personal, be brief, be creative, and be organized. Those are the four. A little bit of overlap with some things that we talked about the last time, but some new thoughts here today as well. So let me go through each of these, and then we'll get to your questions and comments. So be personal. Long-term relationships with any funder tend to be focused on a person. Now, that's obvious if the person is an individual donor. It's maybe not so obvious when it's an organization that you're dealing with, whether that's a foundation, government agency, corporation. That's a little bit different at the start, but inevitably, the long-term relationship tends to focus on a particular individual, the CEO or senior staffer, a foundation or program officer, an individual donor who may be part of a family of donors that you deal with. So focusing on, and I mention this in part because I think there's a great learning value for each of us in looking at how we and others we know in our families or social relationships, how we deal with friendships on a long-term basis. One of the great cliches, at least in American society, goes something like the following. Oh, I haven't talked to my old friend so-and-so for 20 years, but when we get together, it's like nothing has changed. And there's some fairly good research on that subject that suggests that that's not really the case, that people change over time, that relationships do unfortunately deteriorate if they're not nourished. So in being personal, one of the key strategies is simply to do things that bring that relationship back into the forefront, just as we would have a Zoom or a phone call or a family visit with somebody that we're connected with personally. And learning from that for each of you, for me too, is a part of how we keep our skill set up in the making of long-term relationships with funders. when a transition occurs, somebody leaves an organization, retires, passes away, that can set off a cycle of changes, obviously, and to have some preparation for that, just like in the media, eulogies and death notices get prepared sometimes months or even years in advance. Having some idea about how to handle a transition in a relationship when it comes up is important to maintaining a good relationship over the long haul. Your style as a communicator representing your nonprofit and the style of the funder or funder representative that you're dealing with also need to be aligned. What's comfortable for you may not be comfortable for the person that you're interacting with. How do you handle that? In particular, what communication channels work well? I've done for several clients in the last couple of years research studies through a brief survey that help to identify for the um, range of donors and funders that a nonprofit has. What are the most commonly endorsed strategies for communication? And Alejandro referred to some of them at the beginning. It's very straightforward. Is it emails? Is it text messages? Is it telephone calls? Is it in-person meetings? One funder that I've dealt with a lot on behalf of the Venda Museum, where I'm an active member of the board, is someone who has given a great deal of money to the Venda Museum, but who only wants to interact on an in-person basis. And doesn't mean that we don't trade emails to set up several lunches a year, but that's a part of the drill. And because this is a major donor, that's something that, as a board member, has fallen on me to take care of. Other donors don't want that. They don't want to take the time to do something as, if you will, labor intensive as an in-person meeting of lunch or something else. But for significant donors, one of the things that you also need to pay attention to in making the style of interaction personal is how is it changing over time? Speaking as somebody who's not maybe as up as others who are on the line in use of high technology, it's only in the last couple of years that I've become more oriented to some communications, including some related to either gifts that I'm trying to get or gifts that I'm trying to make, using text messages as opposed to email. Now that's just me, but for every significant donor, part of being personal is understanding how communication styles and preferences change over time. A survey helps with that, but that's for the aggregate. Having an idea for any significant donor to your organization, any significant funder, including institutional funders, what kinds of changes are happening in their communication preferences. That's part A of the keeping it up to date. Part B is that it is very risky to generalize. A one size fits all approach does not tend to work very well in maintaining personal relationships. Many of you may know in the world of philanthropy, there's a cliche saying, when you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation. And to use a strategy for Foundation A that worked brilliantly for Foundation B and your contact person there may be a good idea, but it also may not be an effective style of communication. And so paying attention to that and having that as a part of your basic interaction strategy, what works, how has it changed over time if it has, and what doesn't work, and how to account for that in the communication style that you use. So that's enough about being personal. Let's go to the second item, to be brief. And I'm giving particular attention to this because attention is our most valuable asset these days. There are books on that subject. There are conferences about the attention society and how we are all being competed for by whether it's social media or big companies like Amazon, that our attention is being competed for all the time. the attention that is resident in a donor or other funder is also a part of that equation. Attention spans are shorter. And while, since I don't think we have any teenagers on the line here today, our collective attention span may be somewhat longer than that of somebody who's 12 or 8 or 14 or 15. There's still, in terms of what one needs to pay attention to in setting a strategy for long-term relationships, there is an attention span problem that we need to be mindful of. That in some cases, there's a reliance on what you might want to call old-fashioned means of communication that is significantly out of alignment with how people's attention is being competed for today. I recently did a site visit to an organization in the San Fernando Valley that I've given a bit of money to and was interested to find out more about them, and got a very nicely tailored package in a very nicely put together folder at the end of the session that presented a lot of information about the organization. But even as I started to go through it, it immediately became apparent to me that for a lot of people getting that package of information, it might be superficially looked at, but over time, was the person receiving it, frankly, including me, going to look at all its details? I eventually did, but there was a missing ingredient, and that's a one sheet, a one-page, tailored for short attention span summary of what needed to be said about the organization. And that's something that, as a kind of undergirding for a personal relationship over the long haul with a funder, that's important for every nonprofit to have, and to know that that too changes over time, and that there's an opportunity when something significant about the one pager changes because a new program has opened up with your nonprofit or something else has happened. That's also an opportunity for reach out for communication to one or more of your funders to have a talk about that. Monthly newsletters, annual reports, other kinds of documents that are shared. There's still a role for that, but one secret ingredient that I've seen nonprofits use very much to their success in terms of good communications with funders is to have, at least on occasion, a newsletter reviewed by a friendly funder to ask the question, is this too much information? Is it coming out too frequently? What does it, and remembering that funders may differ in terms of their reactions, but to get some kind of feedback from funders about the nature of the communications that you're putting out has an important bearing on your future success. And I'm a huge believer in the importance of one pagers as a way of communicating that in our busy age has a lot of payoff and can still open the door for you to have a more extensive conversation with a funder. So that's a little bit about the importance of being brief. The third B, be creative. And I want to start here with an example from the Venda Museum. Sometimes the personal interests of funders, if you've done a bit of research so that you know what some of them are, something that may, at least initially, seem way out of bounds in terms of what your nonprofit does, but there can be a connection that can help you to promote a healthy long-term relationship with the funder because you express an interest or make something happen that relates to something that the funder as a individual is interested in that you won't know about unless you do a little bit of background research. Here's this specific example. At the Venda Museum, we have a major funder who has a private interest of all things in Cold War air raid sirens. And that was a bit of information we found out about for this funder relatively early in the establishment of the relationship. Just happened to come up in the conversation, and we kept that in our minds for the possible future use. Well, guess what? A couple of years later, a city in the San Gabriel Valley had an old air raid siren that they no longer wanted, and they gave it to us. All we had to do was to pay for its transport to our campus in Culver City. And so we brought the air raid siren to Culver City, and we put up a name plaque to this major funder of ours, naming it after this individual. And I'll tell you, that gave us a lot of brownie points, so to speak, with that particular funder for something that, yes, was within the general mission of the organization, but not anything that we would ever have counted on and wouldn't have known about if we hadn't been paying attention to things about the funder that were beyond they represent this particular interest. Here's what they're interested in giving. That was something that was very personal that really helped us. Now, a lot of nonprofits give gifts to their donors and funders, and I would say that's in general a useful practice, but also something in the building of a long-term relationship that needs to be looked at very carefully. And here I'm going to use my own personal experience. As a donor to the Venda Museum, I've received maybe 6 or 8, somewhere, less than 10 gifts of some sort over the years that I've been a donor. None of them have any cash value. They all relate to the work of the museum and its mission. In one case, it was a tiny little piece, about so big, of the Berlin Wall. And it's something that I treasure. It's not anything that has a cash value, but because it fit within the mission domain of the organization, it made an immediate registration. It was a very thoughtful gift and something that really has had, at least for me, a very positive reaction. On the other side of that, a university that shall remain nameless, but it's the one whose Zoom site we're on right now, has given out several gifts to donors to the university recently that for me were not ideal, in the sense that they were gifts over hundreds of donors that cost something to give out, and that were, it was a pen in one case, it was a bottle of not champagne but a effervescent spirit in another. Not a bad thing to do, but a real question needs to be asked, in my estimation. Is there going to be a pushback to giving out gifts to a lot of people? And I've seen smaller nonprofits do this as well. And raising the question in the mind of some donors, including me, is this an appropriate use of, in the end, some of the funds that I have donated to this particular nonprofit? Was that an appropriate thing to do? I'm not registering, except for me personally, a yes or no answer to that. But I think it's a question that's worth asking. I'll give one more example from me personally. There's an international charity in the medical services field that I gave to for years, and finally stopped giving to because I kept getting these very expensive newsletters, glossy color photographs, multiple pages, newsletters that I didn't frankly have the time to read, and that I knew cost a lot of money to produce. And I wondered, could that money have been better invested? And rationally or not, I'm thinking, gee, is some of my dollars that I've given to this organization been used for that purpose? And I stopped making gifts. There are lots of other charities that do somewhat the same work, and I'd rather give to others where there isn't such to me, a lack of attention being paid to what the reaction from a donor, from a funder might be. Now, a couple of other things about creative responses, then I'll move on to organization and we'll start making this a two-way conversation. Um, some funders put on their own events to bring nonprofits and sometimes even other funders together. If that's something that you know a funder has done or is doing, there may be an opportunity for you to participate in that or even to stimulate such an event. And because that makes for a partnership between you and the funder that isn't only about getting the check for the gift or the grant, that can be a way of building a long-term relationship that has a lot of payoff and continues over time. Similarly, there are networking activities that funders participate in, giving circles for individuals. Southern California Grantmakers has what's called the Family Foundations Information Exchange Program, which for 20 years has been bringing together groups of family foundations to talk about their successes and challenges and how they do business. Now, that's not going to be a group that you, as a nonprofit leader, are going to be invited to join. But if you know about it and know who else is participating in it, that can be a pass through for getting some contacts with other funders that can help you again to build a good relationship. In the case of individual donors or family foundations, paying some attention to the multiple generations of donors that are somewhat typical of family foundations. There's one, Lawrence Welk Foundation, that I know a good deal about, where there are 5 generations of donors involved, from people in their 90s to people who are less than 10 years old. And being aware of that and looking at what are the opportunities to make a communication with different generational levels of donors so that you custom tailor something that would be of interest to them. That can make a difference in 2 ways. One is just you get a chance to communicate with somebody you might not to have the chance to otherwise. And secondly, it's showing respect for the way that funder organization is set up. And then finally, if you have not experimented with this in your nonprofit's activities, think about the possibility of doing a Meet the Funder event where you ask one of your funders to come together with other nonprofits that you put together. All they have to do is simply show up, whether in person or by Zoom, to participate and talk about what they do. Even though you're giving information that might be helpful to some other nonprofit and getting a grant from them, there's also relationship building that goes on in that kind of interaction, and something that can be very helpful. Finally, a little bit about how to organize, and this covers a little bit of the same territory as we did in the November session, but I want to highlight that some kind of record keeping system that's over time, that has the ability to record changes that happen, new activities that come up, problems that may have occurred and how they were resolved, to have a sort of living history of your nonprofit's relationship with the funders that you interact with. It can be anywhere from, in the simplest case, a yellow ruled pad of paper that you keep notes on, to an Excel spreadsheet, to one of the more modest software systems for funder relationships like Little Green Light, to one of the more sophisticated ones like Donor Perfect, to Salesforce. All along the way, there are electronic means as well as physical means of recording what happened, so that you can take account of that in planning for the future. If you're in this for the long haul, you need to have some way of memorializing what you've invested effort in, what the results were, and therefore be able to revisit it to talk about and think about what you want to do next. And the do next certainly includes having a schedule to organize communications to your donors. Now, that can be organized around national events like Giving Tuesday, but it may also be organized around your schedule for at least once a year or larger funders every 6 months, every 3 months, whatever the timing is that you decide on, that you will check off the boxes of you, a CEO, a senior staffer, a board member, taking some action to continue the relationship with the funder so that you know that they call them in the marketing business touch points, that you will have a certain number of touch points with your funders over time. You can have staff support for that, depending upon the size and structure of your organization. But in the end, there's a part of that activity that can't very easily be farmed out, if you will, to junior staff. It's something that needs to be done by a CEO or a senior staffer or a board member. Okay, a couple of concluding thoughts, then we'll start the comments process. Periodically, it's helpful to evaluate how well you're doing in maintaining and building and creating sustained success in your relationships with your funders, both to justify the effort that you're putting into doing that and also to help you improve the process over time. I'd recommend a report to the board of directors at least once a year that includes a review of how the board's doing in terms of their involvement in this process of building long-term relationships and how they might be able to do a little bit better in the future. And that can help to identify strategies that maybe need to be left on the side of the road, other new strategies that may fit, whether it's changes in technology or changes in what you know about one or more of your current funders, and also funders that you may hope to approach in the future that are new to you. I have finished what I wanted to say to you in a first pass.